Sorry, I don't love you. A phrase I've grown accustomed to. Cause with you something isn't wrong, something isn't wrong, something isn't right. I wish you could be.
Hey everyone, welcome to Geekdom is back, as is Marjani Rawls. We promised you an Incredibles 2 episode, so here we are with that. And MJ, I know that when I first came to you about this, we definitely wanted to talk about both of them, and I think that works well because of how this movie picks up. It picks up right where The Incredibles left off. Like, no time had passed. It had not been 14 years for them, everything like that. What did you think of that move?
I liked it. I liked it because I think that, especially with like as much time has passed from the first movie, it allowed me to kind of enjoy what happened in the first movie again. Like, it was just like, oh, this is just kind of a continuation. It wasn't even like it was a sequel. It was like, if you watch them back to back, it's kind of like one big long movie if you wanted to do that. So like, it was helpful. It was like, oh, okay. So they didn't do a thing where it was like, 15 years later or like 10 years later, and like Violet's in college and Dash is in high school and stuff like that. Like, I like that it was like back to back. I really did.
Yeah, it was almost like how the final Harry Potter movie was, or Harry Potter book was split into two movies. It wasn't necessarily a sequel, so to speak. It was just a continuation, and they wanted to tell more of the story for that one, so they took two movies to do it. And with this, that's really what it felt like. You were like, okay, this opening scene, I know exactly where we are. We know what's going on. And especially for me, because like I mentioned in the previous episode, I watched The Incredibles for the first time this year. So I didn't have the 14-year wait that everyone else did who saw it when it first came out and everything like that. So that was really nice because there wasn't a huge gap between my viewings. I watched The Incredibles fairly recently. I want to say it was like a week or two before Incredibles 2 came out and I went to go see it. So it was a pretty quick turnaround for me. That opening scene, it's just like, okay, these are the same characters. Yes, we will have new characters, which we will talk about shortly. But for the most part, you're still getting the full story for them. We're not going to skip parts and have you be all confused when we start this. So that was really nice too.
Yeah, it took, if you saw the first movie and stuff like that, and I've seen a lot of people, like I said, like in the first podcast, like this is like the sequel for older people. It's sequel for people our age who are like our late 20s, early 30s and stuff like that. And even for kids, like if it wasn't a story that like it's nice that if you saw the first movie, but it's not as exactly essential to see it. Like it's a continuation, but it's its own story. And the fact that like they did a sequel and it has a lot of themes that we're dealing with in 2018 as opposed to the 1990s, which is also nice. So it feels like each movie has, it's a contemporary piece on the times.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I do want to talk about these new characters because a lot of them come in a little later. We get that opening scene with the big battle against the mole man dude or whatever he was calling himself, and I think it was like the Undertaker or something. I don't even know. But you have a whole set of new heroes and you have a new villain in this. And I think, even though they introduced a lot of new characters, I think they did it in a way that worked really well because it's not like we were bombarded with all of them at once. Sure, you get the group of heroes who come in later, but just to have additions like Bob Odenkirk to the cast and everything like that, it was like, okay, yes, they are going for this. You even have Sophia Bush as Void in there, and she's one of the heroes who kind of feels like how the rest of us would feel if we were to meet the Incredibles. I really felt like her character spoke for like all of us pretty much.
Yeah, Void, especially like with her meeting Elastigirl, and she's like, "Hey, look what I can do! Oh my god!" And like when she comes face to face with her, she's kind of like flushed because like she's her, she's her hero and stuff like that, and now she's a hero, and she's not trying to embarrass herself. Like I agree with what you said. Like that's kind of like if I met Superman, or like if you met Spider Man, or like Spider Gwen, or somebody like that, you kind of be like, "Oh my god!" Like they're in front of me. Like what do I say? What not?
Right.
Yeah, and I like going back to like the other characters, like Winston Dever. Like he was also another. He's kind of like us. Like he when he was younger, he believed, like his parents believed in supers, and even though he underwent that tragedy, he still believed in superheroes. So like it's kind of like a metaphor where like we might lose family members and stuff like that through tragedy or stuff beyond our control, but like look at us, like me and you talk about reading comics and stuff every day, you know what I mean? So like you still have these superheroes and like these ideals to look up to that like make you hint at there's something good and there's something greater. And there's also his sister, uh Evelyn Dever, who, I mean, we'll find out towards the end that she has an ulterior motive, but she's kind of like the flip side to it. She's like, she blames, superhero worship on losing her parents, and she thinks, her brother and his, trying to restore the supers and whatnot, like it's basically dumb, and she tries to like flip that. So superheroes are always illegal. So with the new characters, like you said, like there aren't that many. They don't put too many. It's just enough to further this story and where this story is going, which I love because like with all the movies that we've seen, there's a lot of, I mean, Spider-Man. They try to pack in too much, and it doesn't work. And Incredibles 2 just got it just right.
Yeah, you mentioned Evelyn, so that kind of segues into talking about the use of villains in this movie because, as you mentioned, it takes a while, but eventually in the movie, we get to the point where we know she does not feel the same way as her brother Winston. And, the first villain that we see is Screensaver or whatever
Yeah.
ridiculous name they come up with for these villains. It's like very obvious and it almost feels like they're not trying, but because it's Pixar, I'm willing to give them some leeway on that because, this is all fiction. It doesn't need to be some super cool, super realistic villain name because we don't, I mean, I guess we do have villains in real life, but not these kind of villains. So that's a whole different story. But to have the villain be under a mask is really interesting because we found out in The Incredibles who the villain was right away because he was like, don't you remember me? And then we get that flashback. And with this, the villain is hiding in the shadows and we don't get to figure it out right away. So I really like that they kind of string you along for a bit and then things start to come full circle and you're like, oh, okay, I see what's happening here.
Well, I mean, I don't think like our pizza delivery men are like moonlighting as supervillains, even though I could be wrong. That's who. That's that's who. The first instance of Screenslaver is.
Okay, Screenslaver.
Yeah,
Not
he's.
Saver.
Yeah. No,
It
I
was
thought
close.
it was. No, I thought it was Screensaver too, but then I'd like heard it. I'm like Screenslaver. All right. Okay, I can buy that. But yeah, like what you mentioned, like everything kind of ties back to the first movie and everything. Like it seemed like every action had a reaction, kind of. So like with these new characters and whatnot, even though they're new, even though we're kind of learning about them, it's like the Incredibles actions in the first movie going into the second movie, and especially with all the collateral damage that happened with the Underminer, basically almost, well, it kind of wasn't their fault. I mean, like that whole big, drill thing, they couldn't really stop it, but they pretty much destroyed the city. So I don't know. Like I felt for the Incredibles at some point in this movie. You know what I mean? Like you kind of like you're like, oh man, like they just want to help, and like the regular humans are just like, nah, we got this, blah blah. We don't really need you, and they kind of like discard them, and it's like, oh, that's kind of sad and whatnot. But I'm sure we'll get into like what happens between Mr. and Mrs. Incredible, and that's a whole storyline within itself.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and just mention quickly some of our favorite moments from this movie before we dive into some more general discussion on it? Because I really enjoyed myself while I was watching this. I don't think it was quite as good as the first one. It was pretty close though. So it was just one of those things where, a lot of sequels don't always do quite as well as that initial movie because you can't really recreate that same feeling of meeting these characters for the first time. But we do get to meet some characters for the first time. And, I mentioned how Void reacts the same way all of us would react meeting our favorite superheroes. And I think I really like that character more when they had that scene together later where Elastigirl goes after Evelyn on the plane and you see Void trying to soften her landing and she's not getting it right at first, but she keeps trying because she's like, okay, my favorite person is falling from the sky at a very fast rate and I need to figure out how to use my powers to do something good.
No, Void, Void is very entertaining because like we kind of touched on, like how would you react when like your hero is there, like when your hero's like this known commodity and you're just kind of starting out, you don't really like have a handle on your powers yet. Like you're kind of like, all right, well if I mess this up, like they'll probably hate me forever. So like, uh, yeah, I understand. Like that was definitely a cool part to me. Like seeing like the apprenticeship kind of like Void and Elastigirl has. Like it wasn't like a true apprenticeship, but like it seemed like, oh, like it's like the new crop of superheroes, and the fact that like it was like women at the forefront, which was also pretty cool. Like I like that theme that happened throughout the Incredibles too, which I'm sure like we'll touch on when we go into a more general discussion. My favorite scene was definitely the scenes with Violet
Okay.
and why do I keep on forgetting his name? Like his her
Dash.
no Violet and not her boyfriend, but like the guy.
Oh, that yeah, the kid. I can't recall his name either. I feel like it was something very generic, like Nick or something.
It's man, I forget every time. Tony, yes.
Tony. Okay, I was close. 4 letters.
Every because like she likes this dude and like she goes up to him and she's like, hey, blah blah, like trying to explain herself. He's like, dude, I don't know you, and it's because Mr. Dicker like does the whole Men in Black kind of plungy thingy and makes him like forget everything. But like her reactions and stuff like that, and I think the first time that Mr. Incredible like finds out that Jack has his powers and he's fighting the raccoon, that was
Yeah,
hilarious to
that's
me.
great.
that was probably one of my favorite parts of the movie too.
Yeah, Jack adds a lot of comedy to this sequel because we knew in the first movie that he had powers, but it's something that everyone else in the family is just now figuring out. And we see when Frozone comes over and Jack just disappears and he freaks out. And then, Mr. Incredible is just going around with the cookie, like waving it in the air until Jack reappears. And it's things like that where, even though Jack isn't going to save the day necessarily because he's a baby, just to be able to see the extent of his powers was fun to explore in this. And we also get the moment between Jack Jack and Edna, where Jack Jack gives himself like Edna's hair and everything like that. And that entire sequence was really funny too, because Edna does not like kids. So it seems, at least. And then she just like falls in love with Jack Jack by the time she's done babysitting him.
Yeah, and then you find out that like Jack Jack has more powers.
Yeah.
Like apparently he's like multiple man. He could like duplicate himself. He could mimic, like you said, and he could like mimic other people's like facial features. Apparently, like with the squirrel, like he had like telekinesis where he like closed the garbage lid. I'm like, this dude, this little kid is basically all the X-Men. Like
Yeah.
he can do all of it. And yeah,
True.
that was the part with Edna was funny because like he's doing all this stuff and then she sees like the whole mimicking thing and she's like rushing like Mr. Incredible out. She's like, all right, great, I'll take him. See you. All right, bye. And then she designs the suit for him and whatnot. Yeah, Jack Jack actually is like probably like one of the big stars of the movie. Like I love that like they put him more to the forefront in this one.
Yeah, plus it allows for them to sort of take a look at the family members individually. Mr. Incredible really struggles with his wife being the center of attention in this movie. And we see that through his body language. And even, as he starts to say things to Helen when she gets the job and he doesn't. And she just kind of gives him this look like, you better get over it. And I really enjoy that dynamic between the two of them.
Oh yeah, Mr. Incredible turns into like the stay-at-home mom. The stay-at-home mom figure in this one, and then like Elastigirl, it is the hero. And if you look at the first movie, Mr. Incredible is doing all these secret missions, like pretending to go to his job that he gets fired from. And like Elastigirl has no idea this is happening, so she's at home like taking care of the kids. This is flipped,
Yeah.
and like it kind of speaks to like the modern era where like women are actually they're the breadwinners. Like they have the opportunity to do incredible things and stuff like that. And it's not always the men who are like always like like it's always me and like what I mean, like I should be out there and stuff like that. And he goes through that, and he has these moments where like Dash and him are watching the television and like they show his car and he's like, whoa, like I thought it wasn't operational anymore. And you see like kind of like little bits of his masculinity kind of like get stripped away from him because he's not the one saving the world. It's Elastigirl. And you could see that like as she does it more and more, like she gets confident and she gets happy. And like I like that this movie kind of tackled those issues and like what we're talking about now, especially with like equal opportunity with women and stuff like that. They did it in a very smart way that made you think and like, all right, cool, like like this is right. Like now it's her turn. Like he's had his turn. Now it's Elastigirl's turn.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that certainly leads us into some more general discussion. We touched on this a little bit with Evelyn ultimately being the villain. We see her go behind the scenes because she's the one who is inventing all of this cool technology, making the suits when Edna isn't making them anyway, which she takes very personally. So, she's the one outfitting Elastigirl for this new job, basically. And the brother is the face of the company. So you have a similar situation there where she sort of feels like she's not nearly as appreciated as her brother. And instead of handling it in a way like Mr. Incredible does, she sort of goes to the evil side and is like, well, these people ruined my parents' lives, got them killed because my parents believed in them too much, so I want to get rid of all of them. And she pretends like she wants to help them until she gets them close enough to her to eliminate them. And so once we find that out and we see her take control of all of the various heroes, regardless of how heroic they actually are, some of them are very questionable, but it's just one of those moments where you have to stop and think like, okay, where did things go wrong for her? And we find out that, it was the parents' death, and the fact that that impacted her in a completely different way than it did her brother was a nice touch too, because it's not like they were in on it together. He was just as clueless as Helen was when Mr. Incredible was going out and doing all these things behind her back at night. So you have some of those parallels to the first movie as well.
I mean, thinking about it, like, can you really blame her? Like, her parents believed in an ideal so much that, her mother wanted to go and hide. And her father was like, no, 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 like, we got to call the supers and stuff like that. And that choice ended up getting him killed. So, yeah, like, she is the villain, absolutely. But, like, I'm sat and I thought about it, and I'm like, it must be something with Disney, like, especially, like, with, like, some MCU villains and stuff like that, like, they're kind of relatable and you kind of see where they're coming from.
Yeah, they definitely treated her in a similar way that they did with Killmonger in Black Panther. They were easy to relate to, and you could definitely understand where their anger and their emotions were coming from.
Yeah, like, I was just kind of like, all right, well, the supers that he called, neither of them picked up because they were illegal. So, I mean, in that way, you kind of could blame regular humans because they made it illegal. But at the same time, the people that, like, her brother kind of, like, worships and loves and is trying to, like, restore their fruit, she had taken away from them because indirectly because of them. So at some point, like, I'm like, all right, well, I kind of do level with her in a way. Like, she's going about it the wrong way, but she kind of does have a point. Like, I would kind of be pissed off if, the reason my parents died was because of that, and that's her motivation. And, like, yeah, like, you kind of do level with her a bit.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think having two different family dynamics in this too was interesting because we really only got to see the Incredibles as a family in the first movie. So to have them be in this second movie along with a brother and sister pairing and just showing how different these dynamics can be, or how they seem on the surface level, but if you dig deeper you'll find something different. I really enjoyed that as well because we mentioned Mr. Incredible not being happy that he wasn't the one to get the job, so they went a little deeper in this movie with the characters, I think, because in the first one it was really this fun family getaway almost to this island where they have to go save each other. So, we didn't dive quite as deep into the characters, I don't think, but because of how many characters they added, we didn't necessarily get that with all of the other heroes too. We get it a tiny bit with Void just because I think of the other group of heroes, she's the one who sort of has the biggest role and gets to evolve the most throughout the film because she's this nervous wreck when we first see her because she's meeting Elastigirl, and then we see her really become the hero that she wants to be by the end of it.
Well, you could kind of flip that on. It's funny because you can kind of flip that on its side with the first movie. So you have, Mr. Incredible, who had his fanboy syndrome, and his fandom actually turns him to being a villain. And with here, it's on the flip side where, with Mrs. Incredible and Void, she actually becomes the hero. And I like that, like, with the movies, they had this, like, mirror image thing going because you see different parenting styles, right? So in the first movie, you have Mrs. Incredible tell the kids about, having secret identities and at first tell them not to use their powers, but then like telling them to be who they are. Then you have Mr. Incredible in this one, who kind of gets he definitely gets overwhelmed, especially with Violet's boy problems, Dash just being Dash, and his homework because he's like what, and then Jack's powers and like them realizing it, and I feel like that you can see through the character. He's like, oh, this is what Elastigirl has to deal with every day. Like this is how she juggles it, and like you feel you're like, all right, well, Mr. Incredible has to learn to kind of be a regular person, and there's like this whole storyline that continues through the first and second movies where he struggles with that. Like he struggles being a regular person, and Elastigirl actually has never really kind of fulfilled being a superhero on her own. So yeah, like the storylines that kind of go throughout the movies are pretty cool because if you've watched both movies, or if you watch the second one and go back to watch the first one, you're like, oh, okay, like there's a lot of cause and effect.
What did you think of how well this movie did in comparison to the first one? Because obviously the movie industry was very different even just 14 years ago. So comparing numbers isn't necessarily what I want to do, but for you, what was the impact of this movie like compared to when you saw the first one?
I feel like a lot. I don't know. I feel like there's like, well, it definitely made more. I think the first movie made like 633 million, and then the second movie to date made 864 million. I mean, that's not too big of a difference. I mean, well, 200 million is actually kind of a big difference, but this one had a bigger budget. This one, I think what helped it is for nostalgic reasons. So you had a whole bunch of people who are our age looking forward to seeing it, and then you had kids. I think it would be. I mean, it's still a good movie, but I think that the nostalgia, and the fact that it had like a whole subsection of older fans definitely helped it. Uh, if it was just kids and stuff like that, like we've seen like like kid movies just do powerhouse numbers. Like I think on a smaller scale, I think Hotel Transylvania 3 was like, I think the number one movie or something like that this weekend, or something like that. Well, it did open against like Skyscraper and stuff like that, but I think, yeah, it definitely helped. It's just like Nickelodeon bringing back like Double Dare, or Rugrats recently and stuff like that. Older fans are going to watch it because they grew up with it, and then they probably have kids now, so they could show the kids. It's like a great family bonding experience, and it's just Disney hits this market out of the park every single time.
Definitely, Disney definitely has an advantage when it comes to a lot of these big blockbuster movies, whether it's animated kids movies or animated movies that both kids and adults want to go see, which is a good majority of the Pixar movies, to be honest, or even just, owning Marvel and Lucasfilm. So to have Disney be at the top of the box office very frequently doesn't surprise anyone, but obviously you have things like inflation even within the last 14 years and everything like that. So I would say the number of people who went to go see this probably roughly equals the same number of people who went to go see The Incredibles in theaters. Maybe a few more went to see it this time, but some people aren't going to go see this if they haven't seen the first one. But as easy as it is to just go on iTunes or even YouTube or Amazon now and rent movies or buy movies, it's like people could sit down on their couch and have it to watch in minutes, if not seconds.
No, you're right. In 2004, 3D and real 3D and Dolby Digital movie theaters weren't really that prevalent.
Yeah.
It definitely is now. So the ticket prices are way higher. So like I agree with you what you said about inflation. Like it probably is a little, just a little bit more, but then again, you're paying, 17, $18 a ticket depending on where you are and, if you have Movie Pass or Stubs Plus or whatnot. Like, so, yeah, you do have to take all of that into account.
Yeah, you mentioned a scene earlier about Mr. Incredible having to help Dash with his homework, and that gives us the great line of why would they change math? And it's one of those things where you could easily understand his frustration, because I'm sure if you and I went to go do pre-calc or calculus or some math that we possibly hated in high school, they might have different ways of doing it now. And, we weren't in high school all that long ago or even college. So it's just one of those things where it's like, why would this thing change? That's like changing science. We don't do that.
Oh, don't give me like a pre-calc question right now. I wouldn't be able to do it. I wouldn't even be able to even wrap my head around even doing it right now.
You'd be like, why are there letters in math? Just stop, please.
Yeah, like quadratic equations and stuff like that. I can't even fathom like trying to do that right now. Like it would take me a while to even get back into that thought process. You gotta consider Mr. Incredible, all he knows is being a superhero. All he wants to know is being a superhero. So like him being a parent, this is kind of like a new world for him. And he's still struggling. It's like, well, look, no, this is what I am. Like I'm supposed to be out there like in my super suit, like fighting crime. But, he kind of tries to put that aside in order to, you know, help his wife go her dream. And even though things go wrong, they're like, hey, do you want me to come back home? He's like, no, 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 I got everything under control, when he doesn't. Like, he's
Yeah.
got, by the third act, he's got a 5 o'clock shadow. He's calling people. He goes to Edna, of all people, to help. So, like, yeah, like, this is a whole new world for him. You know what I mean? Like, he doesn't really know, but it also speaks to society and stuff like that, where like, with a marriage and kind of like gender roles and whatnot, like you may not even know what like your spouse is going through. Like say like you have 2 kids and whatnot, like you can't even fathom. Like if I work and you stay at home, like it's 2 different jobs, but they are jobs and they both aren't important. So I'm glad that like they kind of flipped the coins and like made you like see each parent in a different role.
Yeah, that's something that's going to also appeal to the parents in the audience, because there are probably plenty of parents out there, and I know mine felt this way at some point, where it gets to a point where you just can't help the kids with homework anymore. And you're like, I don't know what's going on. So, you're kind of on your own thing. And he didn't do that to Dash. He sat there and tried to figure it out. But mind you, Dash is also only in maybe middle school. So, he's not so far advanced in math or anything to where it is calculus or something like that. And, there are plenty of people around who probably never had to take calculus, just because I don't know how long that's necessarily been a class offered in high school or whatnot. I know people who don't take it until like college or, whatever. And that's if you go to college too.
Oh yeah, no, I told you. Like I, I don't even know what the curriculum in high school and stuff is now. Like we're so far removed from it. Like you know what I mean? Like even stuff with like biology and whatnot. Like I mean, I know like the basics and whatnot, but like you have to think about like the most of the things that we learned in high school. Like how much of that do we really apply to our lives now? You know what I
None.
mean? Like, but yeah, we're not like applying algebra and whatnot. Like, of course, like we do fractions and stuff like that. Like that's helpful and like multiplication and whatnot. But like, yeah, like it speaks to like that whole like generational divide. Like you have like dad and son. Like back in my day, it wasn't like that. Like, but well, now it is. Can you help me? But I've never seen this before. So like, yeah, like my parents like helped as best as they could, but like at some point they were like, you're on your own. Like, do you need help? Like, do you need like somebody to help you? Like maybe somebody. Yeah. So yeah, I get it.
Pixar's just really great at having those moments for the adults and the kids who go see the movie too. So I think that's part of the appeal. Parents might not mind taking their kids to movies like Incredibles 2 more than once because there are pieces of it that they can enjoy as well. It's not like, they're going to go see this baby cartoon that will be like teaching the kids how to spell or something, which might not be quite as entertaining for them. So it's nice that Disney has always sort of found this way to do that, whether if it's with the Disney animated movies from way back in the day, which were pretty dark, or the Pixar movies now, which aren't quite as dark, but still have some moments.
Well, like look at like Up, right? Look at the
Yeah.
first 3 or 4 minutes of Up in that montage and how sad that was. You're like, wow, this is kind of like a real life thing. Like, oh, like they grow old. Oh no, he passed away. Like his wife, passed away, and now he has to live without her. And I'm like, wow, like this is pretty heavy to kind of do. And then look at like Toy Story 3 and Andy giving away the toys. Like you're like, oh man, like I grew up like watching Toy Story and like Andy's going off to college and he's not gonna play with toys anymore. So like yeah, there's like some like adult themes, but like it's in a way that kids can kind of like understand. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
but Incredibles 2 to me, like from watching it, the morals and themes were more for the adults. And
Right.
but there are base level things like like with Void and Elastigirl, and even with Violet and stuff like that, like girls can kick ass. Like that's pretty uh that was good for like young girls to see. And like, like boys and men can struggle, That's okay. Like you don't like the whole like masculine thing, like I always have to be the hero. Sometimes I'm not going to be the hero. Sometimes my wife will be, I can't do that all the time. Like, but to me, like just watching it and stuff, like I'm like, wow, this is definitely more. This is a movie more for the people who grew up with the first movie. Like it's okay for like younger kids to watch it now, but like this is the payoff and the lessons are people who stuck around for since 2004. That's what I felt.
They definitely do a great job with updating it without losing the essence of what the family is about because, a lot has happened since this first movie just in the world in general. So you have these things that you need to find a way to add in there without making it feel forced. And I think they did a pretty nice job with doing that. Like you said, showing that Elastigirl can sort of be the breadwinner for the family and Mr. Incredible doesn't have to be. He can be Mr. Mom. So it's one of those things where they definitely spent a lot of time going through this and making sure, okay, it's 2018 now when this is coming out, so we need to update it to reflect that. And that's something that you might not always see that people are willing to do because, as you and I both know just from paying attention to the news, Hollywood isn't the first to change by any means. They take their sweet time on getting things to where they should be.
I think recently, like, there's been that push,
Yeah.
and I think that, like, especially with being inclusive and giving women more chances to be directors and lead roles, and even in the pay gap, and especially with minorities, and the recent thing with Scarlett Johansson and transgender roles, and like that transgender people should be considered for more of those roles. I think that Hollywood is starting to wake up. I
Right.
think that we still have a long way to go. But I think that, Hollywood is starting to incorporate some of the things that we're talking about in a way that, like, you know, there's always going to be those people who are against progress. There's always going to, but as you see in the box office, like with movies, like Incredibles 2, or a movie like in a different side of the spectrum, like Get Out, they're profitable because they speak to truth, and they speak in a way that, is kind of like universal, and that it's right. And it's just the right thing to do. And, like I feel like Pixar, especially with movies like Coco and stuff like that, and incorporating other, cultures and whatnot, like I think that they have been getting it right. And I think they have been, like pooling on, everybody and bringing everybody into their universe, which is good.
Absolutely. Well, is there anything we haven't touched on yet that you want to discuss before we wrap up here?
Oh no, I think that like these two pods were awesome, and I think we covered a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say that I do think both of these movies are fairly rewatchable. That's something I'm not necessarily always good at. I'll do it for the podcast or something like that. But usually I have so many things that I want to check out that it's really hard for me to want to dedicate time to rewatching something when I don't have to write about it or a podcast on it or something like that. But I think, Pixar movies tend to be an exception for that. At least, like the initial movies in a series. I know there's 3 Toy Story movies and 3 or 4 Cars movies. I've kind of lost track with the Cars movies because I feel like I'm always seeing them pop up here and there. But, movies like Coco and a lot of the recent work that Pixar has been doing has really just stepped it up for them, and they were already good to begin with. So it's nice to see movies like Coco and Incredibles 2 just sort of bring everything into the current era, and they're so up to date with everything that's going on and diversifying and everything like that.
I mean, I'm interested to see what they're going to do with the next Toy Story movie, because I'm not really sure where they can go with that, because I thought that 3 was pretty much it. You know what I mean? Like I thought, okay, well, the story's wrapped up and whatnot. But Pixar has definitely been more aware, and it's definitely have been, timely, and they definitely tug at the heartstrings. Like they definitely have you thinking. I agree with you that they definitely have like a replay value to them. Like I don't know if I'll be watching Up anytime soon, because it is really sad.
Yeah, that one's a little more difficult to rewatch simply because it's not quite as fun as some of these. I mean, Coco is pretty heavy as well. That's a pretty emotional movie.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where, because of the outcome, it sort of redeems itself in the end. Not that it necessarily needed redeeming, but as far as how fun it is, you're like, okay, and I think once the ending to Coco, it might make it a little easier to rewatch it because you're not sort of going through all of these same initial emotions all over again.
Yeah, but like movies like Brave and that's a really good movie, and Ratatouille and movies like that they're just kind of fun, know. So like, yeah, like Disney kind of has like this Midas touch, where like think of like the older movies like The Lion King and Sleeping Beauty and movies like that. Like they have like insane like watchability, replayability. Like even like when we become 50 and like we have kids, and then when we're even older and then they have kids, we can kind of show them these movies and they'll still be relevant. Like that's crazy. Like that's why Disney will always be able to print out their own money. Like they basically are their own economy.
I'm sure Disney could like sustain an entire state if they needed to. Maybe not one the size of California or Texas, but it's pretty close.
Yeah, if with I think Toy Story 4 coming out next year, and especially with the last Infinity War movie, they definitely, and the last Star Wars movie coming out next year, they'll definitely get close, because they've been hitting the $1 billion mark consistently lately.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Marjani, thank you so much for coming back on to talk about this. I know our plan was initially to do both in the same day, but that did not happen. So I appreciate you scheduling a second time so we could get this one done here and get them released back to back. So, that is definitely a nice thing to be able to do, because sometimes you don't always get to just plan things as you want them to. So this worked out. And of course, to our listeners, thank you all for listening, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
See you later.